So, I know this is a provocative title. It is supposed to be, because for a long time I believed the opposite. So, over the last 11 years, working across healthcare, aviation, enterprise systems, and consulting, I've had the privilege of working with some incredible, talented UX practitioners, researchers, designers, strategists, people who genuinely cared about users and were exceptional at their craft. And yet, I kept watching some of them struggle to create real impact inside organizations. And at the same time, I've watched other people create enormous impact. Not because they were better UX practitioners, sometimes they weren't. And that never made sense to me. So for years, I thought it was about fairness, that fairness was the problem, or I thought the wrong people was getting recognized. It took me a long time to realize it wasn't about fairness at all. It was treating two completely different skills as if they were one. And looking back, I realized I spent years learning how to understand users, but I never really asked whether I understood the organizations I was working inside. I didn't know it yet, but that question would completely change how I thought about UX. So this is the model I believed in for most of my career. It made perfect sense to me. Research leads to insights, insights leads to solutions, and good solutions creates impact. It's simple, it's logical, and almost comforting. It's the story I was taught, it's the story I saw in books, it's the story I also saw in case studies, and if I'm honest, it's the story I also told myself. But this is where my experience stopped matching the actual model. Not because the research was wrong, not because the solution was good, but because something seemed to happen between solution and impact, something I couldn't explain. And the more organizations I worked in, the more I realized it wasn't an exception, it became a pattern. And that gap became the most interesting part of my career so far. So eventually I realized something that completely changed how I think about UX. Understanding a problem and creating impact are two completely different skills. So for years, I treated those two skills as if they were the same thing. I thought that if I became better at understanding users, better at research, better at testing, better at design, impact would naturally follow. But it doesn't. Not automatically, because organizations don't change simply because a problem has been understood. They change when people decide to move. And those are two very different things. I don't think our industry has ignored the second skill, but I think we've simply spent far less time talking about it. So when I started my career, this is roughly how I pictured the work. It's find the problem, understand it, validate it, present it, and change happen, like double, whatever you want to call it. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with this model. It describes excellent UX practices. I still believe in every step of on this slide. But the problem is that it quietly assumes something. It assumes that good work naturally becomes organizational change. That assumption shaped how I worked for years. And eventually I realized it was incomplete. It's not wrong, it's just incomplete. And that distinction really matters. And I identify a genuine user problem. Nothing controversial. There's good research. There's good testing. Evidence that everyone in the room could see. I would present it. People would not. People would agree. And sometimes they'd even thank me for the work. And then, nothing. Khalas. The recommendation quietly disappeared. Priorities changed. Roadmaps shifted. And other work took over. But in weeks later, I'd look back and realize nothing had actually changed. And I remember sitting with that feeling more than once, thinking, how did we all agree and still end up here with nothing? And that became the question I couldn't stop asking. Not once, not twice, project after project. If everybody agrees, why does nothing happen? And at the same time, or at that time, I genuinely didn't know. It wasn't a clever question that was leading to a clever answer. It was something I couldn't explain. Because according to the model I believed in, agreement should have been enough. And yet, It really was. And so I did what I think many of us do. I stood up, I blamed the organization, I blamed the stakeholders, I blamed design maturity, I blamed the people who, in quotation marks, just doesn't get UX. And if I'm honest, I probably said those exact words more than once, usually after a frustrating meeting, usually to another designer, and it felt strangely comforting because it meant I could stay right and the organization was wrong. But then something started bothering me. As a consultant, I kept moving between organizations, different companies, different industries, different cultures, different products, and I kept seeing the same pattern. And eventually I had to ask myself, if this keeps happening everywhere, maybe the organization isn't the only thing I should be questioning. And that was uncomfortable, but it changed everything. And eventually again I realized something I wish I'd realized much earlier. Nobody was trying to stop good UX. Everyone was trying to do their own job well. So engineering was not trying to make my life difficult. They were protecting reliability. Product wasn't ignoring users. They were balancing delivery. Operations wasn't resisting change. They were just trying to keep the lights on. And leadership wasn't dismissing research. They were making decisions across an entire business I couldn't see yet. So again, nobody was irrational. Everyone was acting rationally from their own perspective. And once I saw that, I stopped asking, why don't they understand UX? And I actually started asking, what problem are they solving that I haven't understood yet? And this was a turning point. I wasn't dealing with a UX problem. I was dealing with an organizational problem. And I'd been trying to solve it with UX tools. Research, testing, personas, journey maps. Those things still mattered. They just weren't enough on their own. Because the problem wasn't only understanding users anymore. It was understanding the system the work had to survive inside. A few years ago, I gave a talk called Wireframing 101. I think it was like 5 years ago. It was all about understanding users. It was research, problems, information, and decisions. And I still believe everything I said, but looking back, something was missing. I spent years deliberately learning how users behave. I was studying it, I was practicing it, trying to become better at it. But I spent almost no time deliberately learning how organizations behave. Now, when I say understanding organizations, I'm not talking about stakeholder interviews or gathering business requirements. Those things are very important. They help us understand what an organization says it needs. I'm talking about something much harder, understanding how an organization actually behaves. And again, not stakeholder management, not business goals, something much deeper. How trust forms, how priorities compete, and how momentum builds around an idea. And why some ideas survive and others quietly disappear. Nobody had ever taught me that, and yet it was affecting almost every project I was working on. And then I started asking myself a question that I've never really stopped asking. We've become incredibly intentional about understanding users. We read the books, we attend the conferences, we learn psychology, research methods, accessibility, and behavior. We invest years becoming better at understanding people. So why haven't we become equally intentional about understanding the organizations? Again, not stakeholder management, the organizations. How trust forms, how decisions get made, how good ideas survive. And this is where everything finally started making sense. So for years, I treated understanding users as the whole job. And looking back, it was only half of it. The other half is actually understanding the environment that work had to survive inside. Because organizations are human systems too. They're made out of people. There's relationships, there's history, there's trust, there's constraint, there's competing priorities, and different definitions of success. Exactly like the users we spend our careers researching. And that's the strange part. We spend years deliberately learning how users behave, but very little time deliberately learning how organizations behave, even though we spend every day inside of them. So UX taught me how to understand users, experience taught me how to understand organizations. Not the organization on paper, the organization in practice. And eventually I realized that I needed both. Everything that comes next is really my attempt at answering that question, and how do we become more intentional about understanding organizations. So imagine walking into a new company on your very first day. You don't know anyone, you don't know the history, you don't know why certain decisions were made, you don't know which teams actually work well together or which teams doesn't. You don't know who influences decisions, you don't know who's under pressure, you don't know who's protecting a legacy system, or who's trying to prove themselves. So from the outside, it almost feels like the organization is invisible. And then I realized that's exactly how I approach most organizations. I assumed I understood them because I understood the project. But organizations are far more complex than the projects. And just like users, they have behaviors, they have patterns, there's a history, and there's motivations. And you have to learn them. And then you meet your first few people, you meet a manager, maybe a developer, a product owner, somebody in another team. So at first there's just introductions, maybe names on a Teams call or faces in a meeting. But after every conversation, human to human, you learn something. Not just about that person, about the organization. You begin to understand who depends on who, who's overloaded, who's trusted, who's always consultant before a decision, and who's quietly influencing things behind the scenes. I stopped thinking about conversations as status updates. They became pieces of a much bigger puzzle, and every conversation taught me something new about the organization I was working inside. And then something interesting starts happening. You have another conversation, and then another. Then somebody says, you should really talk to Sarah, or finance will probably have concerns about this, or legal normally gets involved quite late, etc., etc. So without even noticing, the map starts growing. You're no longer just meeting people, you're discovering connections, relationships, dependencies, and decision pathways. And something changes. The organization slowly stops feeling invisible. You're beginning to understand how it actually works. Not from an org chart, from experience. And eventually, you reach a point where you're no longer surprised by decisions, because you understand where they're coming from. When somebody pushes back, you don't immediately think, they don't care about users. Instead, you start asking, what problem are they solving that I haven't understood yet? And that single question completely changed how I worked. Sometimes the answer was risk. Sometimes it was around compliance or budget or a reputation, or sometimes just bad timing. None of those things made the user problem less important, but they helped me understand why my solution wasn't moving forward. So understanding users gave me empathy for people using the product. Understanding organizations gave me empathy for the people building it. And I needed both. So eventually, the room is full. Not because you've met everybody, because obviously that's impossible, but you no longer see isolated people. You see a system. You understand where decisions come from, where trust already exists, where change is difficult, where momentum is building, where people are protecting something important. And this isn't networking, it isn't office politics, And definitely it isn't manipulation, it's learning. Exactly the same way user research is learning. The only difference is the subject has changed. Instead of learning users, you're learning the organization. And the more deliberately I did that, the more often my ideas became reality. Because I wasn't just designing for users anymore, I was designing for the system that had to make those ideas happen. So one of the biggest shifts for me was realizing that being right wasn't enough. So early in my career, I thought if I had the research, if I had the evidence, if I had the best solution, the organization would naturally move in that direction. And when it didn't, I became frustrated because I thought the work should speak for itself. Now, don't misunderstand me. Research still matters. Evidence matters. Being right absolutely matters. But understanding users is only half the question. Your idea still has to survive inside an organization. It has to compete with budgets, roadmaps, risk, deadlines, legacy systems, different priorities. So today, instead of asking, is this the right solution? I also ask, what would have to be true for this organization to adopt it? And that changed the conversations I had. It stopped me defending ideas and started me designing a path for those ideas to become reality. This called me out more than once. A workshop would go very well. Everybody would agree. People would thank me. The findings made sense. The recommendations were solid. I would walk back to my desk thinking, that went well, high fives all around. But again, a few weeks later, nothing had changed. That's when I realized something. Agreement feels like the finish line. It isn't. It's usually the starting line. Because now, someone has to prioritize the work, somebody has to own it, and somebody has to defend it. Somebody has to make room for it. So agreement doesn't create change. People do. Teamwork makes the dream work. Consulting taught me this lesson very quickly. Clients don't buy wireframes. They don't buy personas. They don't buy deliverables. Those things are obviously extremely important, but they're not what somebody is investing in. They're investing in confidence. Confidence that you've understood a problem, confidence that you've understood their organization, confidence that you can help move something forward. That's what people remember. Not your workshop, not a document, the confidence they felt working with you. That changed how I looked at every deliverable I created after that. And again, I also realized something else. Some of the most valuable work I did never happened in a workshop or a design review or a usability test. It happened before meetings, after meetings, walking back to my desk, over coffee, over lunch. Those conversations weren't distractions from the work. They were actually part of the work. Not because I was trying to build influence or convince people. I was really just trying to understand. And I wanted to know what pressures people were under, what success looked like for them, what they were worried about, what they were protecting. Every conversation gave me another piece of the organization. I wasn't simply building relationships, I was learning how the organization actually worked. And that understanding made me a better designer. Not because I designed better or prettier screens, but because I designed solutions that had a better chance of surviving. The first lesson I wish somebody had told me is this: stop communicating like a UX designer. Now, before anyone gets nervous, I'm not saying stop thinking like one. I'm saying stop assuming everyone else does. So as designers, we naturally explain the world through the user. So for example, users can't find feature X, whatever that is, but it's true. But organizations don't make decisions from one perspective. Operations here, support tickets are increasing. Finance, yes, this is costing us money. leadership years, this is becoming a growth risk. The user problem hasn't changed, only the language has. That was one of the biggest mindset shifts in my career. I stopped trying to explain UX better. I started translating user problems into the language that helped other people make decisions. Because communication isn't about making people understand UX. It's about helping them understand why solving this user problem also helps them achieve what they're responsible for. This lesson took me much longer to actually learn. So for years I thought relationships were something you built when you needed support or you needed buy-in or approval, or someone just to champion your idea. But now I see them completely differently. Relationships aren't something you build to gain influence. They are how you learn an organization. Some of the most valuable conversations I've had never happened in workshops, and I mentioned it before. They happened before meetings, walking back to my desk over coffee, over lunch. Not because I had an agenda, because I was curious. What pressures are these people under, or him or her under? What does success look like for them? What keeps them awake at night? And what are they measured on? And every one of those conversations taught me another part of the organization. And looking back, I wasn't only building relationships, I was building understanding. This is probably a lesson that changed me the most. Whenever somebody challenged one of my ideas, my instincts used to be, they don't get it. Today, I ask a different question. What are they trying to protect? Sometimes it's a deadline, sometimes it's a budget, sometimes it's reliability, sometimes it's a customer relationship, sometimes it's their team's reputation, or sometimes it's just trust. But very rarely are people trying to make a product worse. They're usually trying to protect something that's genuinely important from where they are sitting. The moment I started asking that questions, my conversations changed. So when I look back now, none of these lessons were really about communication or relationships or stakeholders. They were all teaching me the same thing, how to understand an organization. And I don't think the biggest shift in my career was becoming a better UX designer. It was becoming a better student of organizations. And once I started understanding both, my work started creating more impact. So I'd like to leave you with one question before I close. So after more than 11 years in UX, I don't think we've neglected understanding users. If anything, I think we've become exceptionally good at it. But every day, our work also has to survive inside organizations. And I wonder, have we become equally intentional about understanding them? Because understanding a problem and creating the conditions for that problem to be solved are two different professional skills. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time and listening to me. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can connect afterwards with my LinkedIn, or you can send me a mail. And maybe there's some questions I can potentially answer.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get my audio back up again. Oh, I'm fiddling. Thank you for that, Ignatius. That was a really great talk, and I think a validating comment. I think Selena says all of this is exactly what I needed to hear. So I mean, that was a great talk. I love the way you just cut through all of it like a hot knife through butter. There's no grayness. It's just black and white. this is what I understand, this is what I know, this is what, how I see it and perceive it, and this is what I'd like to share with you. So there's 2 or 3 questions, and if there are any more questions from anyone else, please add them to the chat. The first question is, how do you build influence in an organization when you don't have the authority, or you're not in a leadership position?
Quite honestly, I think you don't need permission from anybody to be able to do your work better, right? So whenever you enter an organization, you can still try your best to understand that organization better. An employer is an employer. You must build yourself. So I think just go and do it. I hope that answers it. There's no strategy. There's a lot of stuff. I see Jared Spool had a new course that he sent out. But from my perspective, start talking to people. Have a little conversation. Go for coffee. If you smoke cigarettes, go outside and smoke with them a cigarette. It's not all up to your employers to do that. I hope that answers your question.
I like that cigarette thing, because it's so true. It's so true. There's been times in my career where I've done that. Where people that are smoking, and you can't get them on a meeting, but you need to have a chat with them, and they're going to be in the smoking corner. And some of the interesting discussions are happening there.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Bjorn. How does the maturity or the value of UX in organizations in South Africa measure or differ in your experience versus Middle Eastern markets?
I'm smiling because I'm thinking, should I answer this question? But yeah, it's same shit, different day. It's the same kind of thing. It's the same problems. There's no difference. I think the one thing I would miss from South Africa is working with a team where you can literally butt heads and then afterwards go have a burger or a beer, and next morning it's back to business. It's like boom, boom, boom. That's my only difference. That's my only, yeah. Professionally, there's, not a lot. Same problems everywhere. All humans live across the planet. So we're all the same.
Thank you. And then we've got another one. How do you distinguish between organizational politics that can hinder progress and healthy organizational dynamics that simply require patience and alignment?
Sorry, ask again.
How do you distinguish between organizational politics that hinder progress and healthy organizational dynamics that simply require patience and alignment?
Isn't it kind of the same?
Well, I guess the one is a bit more negative versus positive, and the one speaking more to hindering you, and the other one speaking more to just waiting it out. I'll put in the chat.
Yeah, but again, that's just the relation. That's the trust building and stuff, right? So later on, I don't see anything as negative or positive. It's all about what are people's priorities, what are they protecting, and everything I mentioned in the talk. I don't see anything as negative or positive. It's just you can't do that. Well, then what are you going to do? You're going to sit there and be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who was that question from?
I just says Q.
Maybe, who is that? Ngobile, perhaps.
No.
But anyways, send me a message on LinkedIn or somewhere. I can maybe answer that a little bit better. But for me, it's no, man. You just go into an organization. There's going to be positives and negatives, and I don't know. Just talk to humans. Talk to people, not by their title. Talk to people as a human to human. We are UX designers, right? So understand their goals, their pain points, and everything. And then there's a lot of other people, and again, the connections those people have with each other. There's Maybe they understand each other a bit more and they have trust between them. If you come in as an outsider, it's going to be difficult. It's tit for tat, man. Just read the room if you go in. Don't see anything as
And
positive or negative. Everything is positive.
uh, and then we've got one more. We've got two more. Okay. I'll ask Shaima's question first, and we've got another one from Jared. So Shaima's question is, what was the turning point, the actual moment where you realized that seeing yourself as a designer was a bit limiting, and seeing yourself as part of the organization changed the ways you could contribute?
It was year 3. So I worked at a company called EOH. I worked under a couple of guys you would know, but I will not mention their names. So I was basically thrown into the lion's den. And then I had to sink or swim. And then I started observing people. So my family background, we come from teachers and social workers. So there's a lot of observational skills that's tied to those skills. And I myself also worked as a server, as a bartender and a waiter for 8 years. And I played in a band where I entertain people. So it's also understanding, reading the room, seeing what's happening, going with that motion. I think that was in year 3. And since that day, it was, and yeah, I can go into it because I think that's, in quote unquote, my superpower. It's like if I go into an organization, I can very quickly distinguish between that, how professional I am around it. It's kind of questionable because sometimes people tell me you're too casual. But what does that mean? I'm easily approachable. I can easily dissect what is what. So yeah, I think hopefully that answered your question. So it's been a long time. It's literally just observations. If you sit in a meeting room or anywhere, if you're shaking somebody's hand, feel the tension of their hand on your hand. Look how they speak to other people. What facial expressions do they make? If somebody else walks in a room who's twitching or doing something weird, just constantly observing. That's one of a UX designer's best abilities, observational skills. So just hone in on that and, yeah, learn more from it.
Last question, and this is from Jared. I think somewhat similar to Shaima's question, but slightly nuanced. What skill has contributed more to your success? Becoming a better designer in the organization, or becoming better at influencing people and or relationships?
Most probably soft skills, but those soft skills I built again by being a waiter for 8 years and playing in a band for 8 years, and having with that a great mentor. And I will shout out his name, Jaco van der Heever from Sand Dollar Design. If it wasn't for him, find a great mentor and just use your skills.
Yeah.
Not everybody's the same, right? I'm much different than everybody else. It's just find somebody that can identify your strength and gravitate towards those type of people, I believe.
No, that was
Hope
good.
that
Thank
answers
you.
your question, buddy.
Again, I'll drop Ignatius's LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to connect with Ignatius, just dropping the link now in the chat. Ignatius, Iggy, thank you so much again for the black and white, for the insights, for the info, for the knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Iggy.
Thank you, Iggy.
Hi, Iggy.
Hi, Iggy.
Are we going? Hey, we're calling it back right from the beginning, so we're closing it like a nice entertainment. Cheers, Iggy. Thank you, everybody, again for your time. Thank you for joining UX South Africa.